Hello everyone. If you love touching animal stories and want to follow the inspiring journey of these adorable friends, don't forget to hit the subscribe button now so you won't miss any of our videos. Now, let's dive into today's emotional story. The sharp echo of footsteps reverberated down the dimly lit corridor of Cedarwood Animal Shelter, a place where time ran out for too many souls. Margaret Lewis, a shelter worker for over 15 years, walked with a heavy heart. In her hands was a worn clipboard, the topmost paper bearing a name circled in red. Max. Max, a German shepherd, once powerful and proud, now lay curled in the farthest kennel. His once thick coat had dulled, patches of missing fur revealing skin stretched thin over his frame. His ribs pressed against his sides, and his breathing was slow, labored. He wasn't just sick, he was broken. Margaret knelt before the kennel door, pressing her palm against the cool metal bars. "I'm sorry, boy," she whispered, her voice tight with emotion. Max didn't stir. He hadn't reacted to much in weeks. The shelter vet had tried antibiotics, different foods, even IV fluids, but nothing worked. The shelter was overcrowded, the budget stretched thin. And so, today, Max's name was added to the list. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the latch. "Procedure Room B." The words on the door at the end of the hall seemed to burn into her vision. Then, a voice shattered the silence. "No, please stop." A small figure bolted through the staff-only entrance. A girl, maybe 10 years old, her blonde hair tangled from the wind, tears streaking her flushed cheeks. Behind her, a woman followed, breathless and alarmed. "Sophie, wait, you can't be back here." But Sophie didn't listen. She dropped to her knees right in front of Max's kennel, her small hands gripping the bars. Margaret froze. No visitors were allowed here. Director Thomas would be furious, but something about the sheer desperation in the girl's eyes stopped her from intervening. Then the impossible happened. Max, who hadn't lifted his head for days, stirred. A slow, painful movement. His ears twitched. His dull eyes found Sophie's face. And for a brief moment, recognition flickered in those lifeless depths. Sophie choked on a sob. "Max, it's you." Vindman MCC Hun. Margaret's heart stilled. How did this girl know him? Sophie reached into her pocket with trembling fingers, pulling out a crumpled piece of construction paper. She unfolded it carefully, smoothing out the wrinkles. A child's drawing. It showed a German shepherd, standing tall beside a stick-figure girl. Above them, in shaky, handwritten letters, were the words, "I found you." Tears welled in Sophie's eyes. "I knew it. I knew we'd find each other." Margaret felt a lump rise in her throat. What was happening? The woman, Sophie's mother, stepped forward, confusion and concern etched across her face. "Sophie, sweetheart, how do you know this dog?" Sophie didn't turn around. She only pressed closer to the kennel. "Because he's mine. He was Daddy's." Silence fell like a weight over the room. Margaret's breath caught. "Daddy's?" Her gaze flickered back to the clipboard in her hands. Max had been found wandering near the highway, sick and half-starved. No ID, no microchip, just another stray, another burden the shelter couldn't afford. But now it wasn't that simple. Margaret swallowed hard, then moved toward the kennel, her fingers shaking as she reached for Max's ear. A military tattoo. Her pulse pounded. No, it couldn't be. She turned to Sophie's mother, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who was your husband?" The woman hesitated before answering. "Captain Daniel Harper, U.S. Army, killed in action 8 months ago." Margaret closed her eyes. She had heard that name before. Her hands trembled as she inspected the tattoo again. The numbers matched. Max wasn't just any dog. He was K9 Max, military service number 4472, trained for search and rescue. He had been part of Captain Harper's unit, and he had been missing since the day Daniel Harper never came home. Margaret exhaled shakily, stepping back from the kennel as realization settled in her bones. This wasn't just a stray, this was a soldier, and Sophie. She wasn't just a little girl begging for a dog. She was fighting for the last piece of her father she had left. "Mom, we have to save him," Sophie whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "Daddy would want us to." Tears slipped down Margaret's cheeks. We might not have much time, but maybe, just maybe, there was still enough. Before this moment, before the shelter, before the sickness, before the silence, Sophie Harper had been a girl full of light. At 10 years old, she had a laugh that could brighten the dullest of days, a boundless curiosity that made her father shake his head in amusement, and a heart big enough to love the whole world. But then came the night that stole everything. It was 8 months ago, on a humid summer evening. Sophie had been playing in the backyard, chasing fireflies while her mother, Grace Harper, prepared dinner inside. The scent of grilled chicken lingered in the air, mixing with the crisp smell of freshly cut grass. Max, her father's German shepherd, was there too, always watching, always protecting. The phone rang inside the house. Sophie barely noticed it at first, too lost in her game. But then everything changed. The back door swung open, slamming against the frame. Her mother's scream split the air. Sophie turned in time to see Grace collapse against the kitchen counter, her legs giving out beneath her. A metallic clang echoed as the phone clattered to the floor. Sophie had never seen her mother like this. Her strong, steady, unshakable mother, sobbing, gasping for breath, clutching at nothing. She ran inside, heart hammering in her chest. Mom, what happened?" Grace couldn't speak. She only reached out, pulling Sophie into her arms, holding her so tight it hurt. Sophie's world spun. Something terrible had happened. She knew it in the way her mother trembled, in the way the world suddenly felt smaller, darker, wrong. Then the words came, from the phone. From the voice on the other end, words that shattered everything. "Captain Daniel Harper was killed in action earlier today. We are deeply sorry for your loss." Sophie stopped breathing. No. Her father wasn't dead. He was supposed to be coming home in 3 weeks. He promised her. He never broke his promises. But the voice on the phone didn't care about promises, and suddenly, he was gone. In the days that followed, everything felt wrong. The house, once filled with warmth and laughter, felt cold. Grace barely spoke. Her eyes were hollow, staring at nothing, and Sophie? She didn't know how to exist in a world where her father wasn't coming back. Neither did Max. The German shepherd had always been a shadow by Captain Harper's side, his unwavering protector in both battle and peace. But now, he searched for a man who would never walk through the front door again. For the first few weeks, Max refused to leave the porch. Every night, he sat by the front steps, his eyes fixed on the road, waiting. No matter how many times Sophie begged him to come inside, no matter how many times Grace whispered that Daddy isn't coming home, Max refused to believe it. He was a soldier, and soldiers never left their partners behind. Until one night, he disappeared. Sophie woke to an empty porch, no paw prints in the morning dew. No shadow by the door. Max was just gone. They searched for weeks, flyers, phone calls. Animal shelters, nothing. Grace told her it was time to let go. That maybe Max had wandered too far, or something worse, but Sophie knew better. Somewhere out there, Max was still looking for her father. And maybe, just maybe, he had been looking for her, too. Sophie gripped the cold metal bars of Max's kennel, her fingers aching from how tightly she held on. "It's really him," she whispered again, her voice trembling. The sick, frail dog in front of her had once been strong, fearless, unbreakable. And now he was barely holding on. Her mother knelt beside her, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "Sweetheart, if this really is Max, he's very sick." Sophie didn't need to be told. She could see it, but none of that mattered. "He waited for us, Mom." Her voice broke. "We can't let him die here. We just can't." Tears filled Grace's eyes. She looked at Margaret, the shelter worker, as if searching for an answer, some kind of hope. Margaret's voice was heavy when she spoke. "He's been declining for weeks. The vet says there's nothing more we can do." Sophie turned to her mother, her blue eyes burning with determination. "Then we do something." Grace hesitated, her gaze flicking between her daughter and the dying dog. There was no easy answer. Taking Max home meant expenses they couldn't afford, medical treatments that might not even work. It meant risking more heartbreak. But then her daughter spoke. For months, Sophie had barely spoken at all. And now she was fighting. Grace swallowed the lump in her throat. Maybe losing Max again would break them, but leaving him behind, that would destroy them. She reached out and wiped a tear from Sophie's cheek. "Okay," Sophie's breath hitched. "Really?" Grace nodded, determination settling in her bones. "We take him home." A sob of relief tore from Sophie's chest as she buried her face in her mother's shoulder. Max let out a faint, gravelly sigh, his weak tail giving the tiniest flick. Margaret pressed a trembling hand to her lips, blinking back tears. She had seen many dogs leave Cedarwood Animal Shelter, but none like this, none who had just been given a second chance at life. The drive home from the shelter was tense. Every bump in the road felt like a battle, every turn an agonizing eternity. Sophie sat in the back seat, her hands never leaving Max's frail body. "Stay with me," she whispered over and over, pressing her face into his thin fur. "Please, Max, just hold on." The German shepherd barely moved. His breathing was shallow, his body limp. Grace glanced at them through the rearview mirror, her heart tightening. She had never seen Sophie like this, not since Daniel's funeral, and she had never seen Max like this either. The last time he had ridden in this car, he was strong, full of life. Now he was a shadow of the dog they once knew, but he was still here. And as long as he was still breathing, they had to fight for him. Getting Max inside was no easy task. Grace had to lift him, his body light but unresponsive. The once mighty dog couldn't even stand. Sophie hurried ahead, spreading blankets in the living room. "Right here, Mom," she called, patting the soft pile she had prepared. Together, they gently placed Max down. His eyes flickered open for a moment before closing again, his chest rising and falling in weak, uneven breaths. Sophie immediately curled up beside him, her small fingers brushing over his fur. Grace hesitated, watching them. She knew what this was. Her daughter was bracing for the worst. And so was she, but she couldn't say that, not now. Instead, she said, "I'm going to call the vet." Sophie didn't look up, she just nodded, her silent plea filling the room. "Please, don't let him die." Dr. Mitchell at Willow Creek Veterinary Clinic picked up on the second ring. When Grace explained the situation, his voice grew serious. "He's in critical condition. He's severely malnourished, likely dehydrated, and whatever illness he has may already be too advanced." Grace closed her eyes, gripping the phone tighter. "But," Dr. Mitchell continued, "if he's still holding on, there's a chance." A chance, she exhaled. That was all they needed. "What do we do?" she asked. "First, he needs fluids. Try to get him to drink, even just a little. We'll run blood tests in the morning to determine if it's an infection, organ failure, or something else entirely." Something else. Grace's stomach twisted. She didn't ask what something else meant. Instead, she whispered, "Okay, we'll bring him in first thing." When she returned to the living room, Sophie was still lying beside Max, her head resting against his side. Grace knelt down and ran a hand over his ribs, so thin, so fragile. "We need to get him to drink," she said softly. Sophie nodded quickly. "I'll do it." She ran to the kitchen, coming back with a small bowl of water. She dipped her fingers in and held them to Max's lips. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the faintest flicker of movement. His tongue barely brushed against her fingers, but it was something. Sophie gasped, "Mom, he's trying." Grace's eyes burned with emotion. "Then we keep going." As the hours stretched on, they fought for Max together. They coaxed small sips of water into him. They wiped his fur with a damp cloth to cool his fever. And as the night deepened, Sophie began to talk. She told him stories about her dad. "Do you remember when Dad brought you home, Max?" She whispered, "I was scared of you at first. A small, watery laugh escaped her. "I thought you were too big. But Dad said you were the gentlest protector in the world, that you'd always keep us safe." She sniffled, pressing a hand against his frail chest. "You did, Max. You kept us safe. You kept him safe, too." Grace listened from the doorway, her heart aching. She had never heard Sophie talk about her father like this since he died. But here she was, pouring her heart out to the one who had been with Daniel until the very end. Max's breathing was still uneven, but something shifted in him. He was listening. Grace stepped forward, gently resting a hand on Sophie's shoulder. "Keep talking to him, sweetheart," she whispered. "I think he needs to hear this just as much as you do." Sophie swallowed hard and nodded. She took Max's paw in her hand, and she kept talking. When the sun finally rose, Max was still there. His condition hadn't worsened. If anything, there was the faintest hint of strength in his body. Sophie had fallen asleep beside him, her fingers still curled in his fur. Grace, exhausted but relieved, reached for her phone and dialed the vet. She knew they had a long road ahead, but for the first time in months, she dared to hope. Because Max was still fighting, and as long as he fought, so would they. The drive to Willow Creek Veterinary Clinic was silent. Grace gripped the wheel tightly, her knuckles white, while Sophie sat in the back with Max's head resting on her lap. He was still breathing, but barely. Every now and then, his tail twitched, small, weak movements, but movements nonetheless. Sophie never stopped whispering to him. "You're going to be okay, Max," she murmured. "Just hold on a little longer, we're almost there." Max let out a soft sigh, his breath warm against Sophie's hand. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Dr. Mitchell was already waiting outside when they arrived. He rushed forward as Grace opened the back door, his trained eyes scanning Max's frail body. Concern creased his brow. "Let's get him inside," he said, voice firm but gentle. Sophie tried to follow, but a nurse stopped her. "Sweetheart, we need to take Max in for tests first." Tears welled in her eyes, but Grace crouched beside her, squeezing her shoulders. "We'll be right here. He needs this, okay?" Sophie swallowed hard, then nodded that she watched as they wheeled Max away, his body barely rising and falling with each breath. Then the doors swung shut, and all she could do was wait. An hour later, Dr. Mitchell returned. Grace and Sophie sprang to their feet. Sophie grabbed his sleeve. "Is he okay? Is he?" Dr. Mitchell knelt to her level. His face was serious. "He's very sick, Sophie," he said gently. "But he's a fighter, just like you." Sophie bit her lip, nodding fiercely. "We know." Dr. Mitchell glanced at Grace before continuing. "We ran a full panel of tests. Max's condition is caused by a combination of extreme malnutrition, untreated infections, and—" He hesitated. "There's evidence of toxic exposure." Grace's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "There are traces of a sedative in his system, one that isn't typically used in shelters or veterinary clinics." Grace felt sick. Someone had done this to Max. Sophie gripped her mother's hand, her fingers ice cold. "Can you save him?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Mitchell hesitated. "It's going to be hard. He'll need fluids, medications, careful feeding, and round-the-clock monitoring." He looked at Grace. "It won't be cheap. It won't be easy, and even if he survives, there's a chance he'll never fully recover." Grace already knew the answer. She looked at Sophie. She saw the same determination in her daughter's eyes that she had seen the night before, as she lay beside Max, whispering stories of Daniel. "There was only one choice. We'll do whatever it takes," Grace said firmly. Sophie broke into a relieved sob, throwing her arms around her mother. Dr. Mitchell nodded. "Then let's get to work." The first few weeks were grueling. Max was placed on a strict medical regimen for fluids, antibiotics, and physical therapy to help rebuild his muscles. Sophie never left his side. She read to him. She sang to him. She helped him eat, one tiny bite at a time. And every day, he got a little stronger. One morning, as Sophie sat beside him, he did something that made her gasp. He lifted his head, not much, just enough to press his nose against her palm. Sophie's heart nearly burst. "Mom." She called, her voice full of hope. Grace rushed over. And there it was, the spark in Max's eyes. The same fierce, unwavering loyalty that had been there since the day Daniel brought him home. He wasn't just surviving, he was fighting to live. Months passed. Max gained weight. His coat grew shinier. His eyes became bright again. The day he finally stood on his own 4 legs, Sophie cried. She wrapped her arms around his thick neck, pressing her face into his fur. "You did it, Max," she whispered. "You came back." Grace watched from the doorway, tears in her eyes. She had once feared that Sophie would never heal, that the loss of her father had taken too much from her. But now, looking at her, smiling, laughing, alive, she knew the truth. Max hadn't just saved himself, he had saved Sophie, too. 1 year later, on a crisp autumn morning, they visited Daniel's grave. Sophie held Max's leash tightly, her free hand clutching a bouquet of wildflowers. As they reached the headstone, Max sat at attention. His ears pricked, his posture perfect. Just like a soldier, Sophie knelt, placing the flowers down. Then, she looked at Max. "You still remember him, don't you?" she whispered. Max's tail thumped against the ground. And for the first time since losing Daniel, Grace didn't feel alone. She rested a hand on Max's back, her fingers curling into his thick fur. Together, the 3 of them stood there, mother, daughter, and dog. A family, whole once more. Message from the story. This story is a testament to the power of love, resilience, and second chances. It reminds us that healing can come from the most unexpected places, even from a dog who was once on the brink of death. Max was more than just a pet. He was a protector, a friend, and a symbol of hope for Sophie and Grace. Just as he needed them to survive, they needed him to heal. His presence helped Sophie find her voice again, just as she helped him find the strength to keep fighting. The story also highlights the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. Dogs don't just offer companionship, they offer unconditional love, loyalty, and emotional healing. Max's journey from sickness to strength mirrors Sophie's journey from grief to recovery, proving that sometimes the ones we save end up saving us in return. Ultimately, this story teaches us that no one is ever truly lost as long as they are loved. Even in the darkest moments, there is always hope, kindness, and the chance for a new beginning.